folks, this is State Representative Ryan Warner with another edition of Legislative Report. Today we are in Connellsville and we are at the Connellsville Canteen. And with me today is Daniel Cox, who is the Executive Director of Fayette County Cultural Trust. He's going to give us a brief tour of the grounds here and a little bit of information. So Daniel, thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate your time here. And why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about the canteen and how the idea came about, and what room we're in here now.
First off, I'd like to welcome you to the Connellsville Canteen. This was a 3-year working in progress building. And the canteen was actually started during World War II by Rose Brady and her brother, Father Francis Brady. During World War II, she would go down to the train station, see the troops getting off the trains. The troops weren't getting fed during the war. They didn't have anything to do but stretch their legs. So she took it upon herself to start the canteen, where she started feeding all the troops. During 1944 and 1946, she was able to raise $50,000 and also get 800 volunteers to run her canteen. And throughout the years that she spent with the canteen and feeding the troops, she was able to feed over 600,000 troops that stopped in Connellsville during the war. So that's a big accomplishment that really the story wasn't getting told in Connellsville. So we felt that this was a perfect venue to tell that story about the canteen and what it meant to the troops that stopped here during the war.
Now, along with the other various rooms here, this is an actual restaurant that we're in right now. Do you want to tell us here the hours of operation or anything about the restaurant?
Correct. We just opened this restaurant starting in December. We finished our commercial kitchen. We hired a chef, Neil Smith, and he's able to run the restaurant for us. We're open Tuesday through Saturday from 8 o'clock till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We serve breakfast and lunch. But along with the kitchen, we're going to use our kitchen as a training facility for kids. We're going to train them in the culinary experience, how to operate a restaurant, how to cook meals in the kitchen, and most importantly, how to interact with tourists that are in our area.
That's fantastic. Now, I understand there are a few displays here in the restaurant portion of the canteen, and I understand you want to tell us a little bit about the displays over here, so let's take a walk over and you can tell us what's going on.
Okay.
Daniel, we're in the restaurant portion of the canteen, and there are quite a few displays here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's here in the restaurant?
Well, in the display cases, we usually change this out every six months to a year to get fresh, new educational things in here. But one thing we're focusing on this year is the 100th anniversary of the American Red Cross in Connellsville. And on display, we have some American Red Cross uniforms from World War II over here. And actually a picture that was taken in 1918, and those are Red Cross ladies below the uniform that were in Connellsville assigned to just one church. That was St. Rita's Church. And also during that same day that picture was taken, July 9th, 1918, they had the largest Red Cross parade in Fayette County on Crawford Avenue, which was called Main Street back then. But that was pretty phenomenal. Over 3,500 Red Cross ladies marched down our street, all carrying the Red Cross flags. And also behind you, we have a Red Cross World War I uniform. And if you look at the uniform closely, it looks like it's made of gauze. The reason being because if they were helping troops in the field and they ran out of gauze, they could also use their uniforms for bandages. And we've been partnering also with the Red Cross from Chestnut Hill, which is a local chapter. And they were able to lend us a vintage Red Cross flag here. And then all these World War II Red Cross dolls all belong to the American Red Cross. But these dolls were all manufactured in the 40s. On the far wall over here, and amongst all the other memorabilia we have from World War II, we have a model of the Hindenburg. And the Hindenburg actually has 2 ties to Connellsville. The first tie is Johnny Woodruff, who won the gold medal in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. He would have seen the Hindenburg flying over the Olympic Stadium, and when it flew over the stadium, it was sporting the Olympic ring, so that was the opening of the Olympic Games. And Herb Morrison, who's also from Connellsville, coined the phrase, "Oh, the humanity." He actually saw the Hindenburg explode, and he was the only reporter on scene back in New Jersey when that devastating disaster happened. So we actually have a tie to the beginning of the Hindenburg and a tie to the very end of the Hindenburg.
Hey, Daniel, thank you very much for showing us around the restaurant portion here. And I understand that our next stop is going to be the Stage Door Canteen.
Canteen is actually filled with all kinds of information from World War II, from the troops that served, and basically from their families. Everything in the canteen, all the Purple Hearts, all the Bronze Stars, all the burial flags were actually donated to our organization, the Fayette County Cultural Trust. So we're very proud to maintain the collection for everybody to see and learn about what happened in Fayette County in the 1940s. With all the stories on the walls, we have one here of Homer Cavanaugh. He was actually in Europe during World War II, and he sent a Western Union telegraph home to his parents saying he was coming home on furlough and he needed some extra money to get from New York City back to Connellsville. Homer actually ended up getting killed in action 2 weeks after he sent the telegraph to his family. So that's one of the stories we would like to focus on as well. So.
All right, Dan, you want to tell us a little bit about where we're at right now?
Okay, another thing we have in the canteen, we have 4 or 5 different burial flags, but this burial flag in particular is very special. It belongs to Carl E. McElhaney. Carl got killed in France during the war, got killed in action. And actually, when he got killed, the caskets weren't coming back to the States draped with burial flags. So France actually took it upon themselves to make their burial flags for the U.S. troops. And this is one of only 500 Gold Star flags ever produced during World War II. And above it is a shadow box. All those belongings in that shadow box were on Carl's person when he got killed in action. And that actually tells the story of how they would put those belongings back in a green pouch, and that's what the next of kin would have gotten back from the deceased.
I also see, along with, there's so many displays here, but there's also a stage here. Do you have any local acts, any bands play?
Yes, we have Seton Hill University has actually come here several times. Dr. Tim Crane, he gave us a lecture on the Holocaust. He did Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he mainly focuses on the wars and the experiences that people have during the wars. So we have those kind of things. We do the ambassador program where we have all the historical societies come here and talk about the different areas in the county, and all kinds of different other programs that we have here for the public.
Hey, Dan, you want to tell us a little bit about this display here?
This was actually Wally Schroyer. We have his Bronze Star and his Purple Heart in the case here. And Wally had an interesting story during World War II. He was actually a prisoner of war. And in the case is a picture of Wally and some of the other American troops that were prisoners of war at the time. And that picture was taken in Germany. If you look closely, you can see a German soldier looking out the window at the prisoners. But more importantly in that picture, if you notice, everybody in that picture is either missing legs or arms, which was kind of tragic back then. And that picture was taken right before a swap. We were swapping German prisoners for the American prisoners at that time.
So among all the World War II displays here, I also see some pictures of a local musician to these parts, Harold Betters. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what's on this side of the wall over here?
Yes, since we use this room also for entertainment, we have up-and-coming musicians come here and play in front of a small audience. And this wall is actually dedicated to Harold Betters, who was a Connellsville fixture actually in Pittsburgh in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Throughout Harold's career, he made 13 albums, and he was a big fixture at they call it the Better House in Pittsburgh that he would always play in. He was also on the Mike Douglas show and some other shows throughout the time. And he also made, at one point, Musician of the Year for the Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce.
Well, Daniel, thank you very much for showing us the room here. I understand that our next stop is going to be the railroad room.
Yes, it's right next door.
Well, that's good. So now we're in the train room. So why don't you give us a history of this room, tell us how this train set got here, and just some information about it.
Well, first off, I'd like to welcome you to Harry Clark's Indian Creek Valley Railroad display. This display is 25 feet by 55 feet long. It took Harry Clark 40 years of his life to make. And this display actually started out in Connellsville, up on 7-Eleven. It was bought as a birthday present for another individual who owns Nemacolin Woodlands Resort. So it was actually trucked from Connellsville up to Nemacolin Woodlands, where it sat at the Wild Side for a few years. And then the building got used for another purpose, so we actually moved the train display back here. And the story behind this building is the building was actually built, the walls of the building, and then the train display was lowered in place, and then we built the roof around the train display. This took Harry Clark 40 years of his life to build, and actually every time the train display was moved, it was $40,000. But if you look at the quality of the display, you can see it in just in the trees by themselves. Each tree was made of dried hydrangeas spirea leaves. Each tree trunk was dipped in melted crayons to get the different effects. This roundhouse here has over 5,000 handmade windows in it by itself. So it's quite the feat back then that Harry Clark put all the time into the train display.
Now, is there certain hours of operation? Can anyone come in when they're eating, or how does this room operate?
We do charge a nominal fee, $2, to keep the train room going. And we're open, every day, Tuesday through Saturday, 8 to 3. So anybody's welcome to come here any day and see the trains in operation.
Okay, great. I understand. The last room that we're going to visit here is a Native American display, correct?
Correct.
All right. We're in our final destination here in today's tour. We are in the Native American Interpretive Center. I also see some artifacts from the French and Indian War here, a lot of Native American artifacts. Daniel, tell us about this room here.
Well, this room is actually a partnership between California University of Pennsylvania, Fayette Economic Development Council, and the Fayette County Cultural Trust. We were able to get a grant from the Lower Highlands Visitors Bureau to purchase the showcases and also the interpretive signs that we had on the wall. And the reason this is here is because I've only lived in Fayette County 14 years. But every time you ask somebody what's the history of the area, they always start with the French and Indian War. But they never go back thousands of years before that and talk about the Native Americans that were actually living off the land back then. Some of the neat things that we have in here from California University, we have a collection of arrowheads and stone tools that were made 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. And if you can picture somebody living in the land that you're standing on now, 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, that was a long time. And even before they were here, Pennsylvania was all covered with oceans. It was oceans back then. Fayette's artifacts, they were found at the tax-free zone by the Connellsville Airport. Whenever you find artifacts when you're building buildings or whatever, the law says you have to stop and call in archaeologists to examine what was there before. So they had to stop their work. Archaeologists actually from California University came in for Fayette and excavated all the items that you see here. And then after they were cataloged and all numbered, then they could start work again. So we actually have their artifacts as well. And another reasoning for this little museum here is because when artifacts are found, like Fayette, they don't deal with history, they're more economic development. So we find in most cases that they would have put them in a box and put them in their basement. So that's another reason why we're here. We want to educate people on what was happening in this part of Pennsylvania thousands of years ago and what the Native Americans would have lived like back then as well.
I also see when you first walk in, it's very noticeable, there's a bust of George Washington and some French and Indian War artifacts. You kind of want to just describe what the bust is about?
Yes, actually Colonel Crawford lived here many years ago. He is a land surveyor for George Washington. George Washington actually came to Connellsville several times before it was actually Connellsville. And he surveyed the land for George Washington. And we actually have a life mask of George Washington, so that's pretty much how he would have actually looked back then when he was roaming the areas with Colonel Crawford. And we tie that in also to Colonel Crawford because we had an artist in Connellsville way back when also that made our statue of Colonel Crawford that stands in front of our Carnegie Library. And that statue is actually turning 100 years old this year. So we're raised funds to get it cleaned up, and we're going to celebrate the 100th anniversary here shortly. And Kilpatrick actually made two statues. He made the one of Colonel Crawford in Connellsville, and he also made the bronze statue that stands in Waterford, Pennsylvania. And the one in Waterford is the only statue of George Washington in America in a British uniform. So that's pretty awesome.
Well, that's fantastic. And is there any information you want to share about the Fayette County Cultural Trust while we have a second here? Do you need volunteers? How do you join the trust? Any contact information you want to share, I'd be more than happy to provide that.
The canteen, we're always looking for volunteers. If anybody wants to volunteer, we're open. Actually, if youth want to come in, they can learn about the Native Americans that were here. We also would like to open it up to schools. We do field trips. We have school plans that we can teach kids on the history of the area, not only with World War II, but now with the Native Americans. And we've actually hosted Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts to both areas as well. So.
Well, great. Daniel, thank you so much for taking time to show us here today. That was a great tour. Folks, fortunately, that's it. We are out of time for this episode of Legislative Report. Again, I'm State Representative Ryan Warner. We'll have contact information on the screen. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me or my office. Thank you very much, and God bless.